Imagine discovering that an event that shook the world political scene may have been mentioned in an ancient text written thousands of years ago. A book shrouded in mystery, cited by some scholars and ignored by many others, talks about the fall of rulers, judgments on powerful leaders, and events that would mark the destiny of entire nations. This book is known as the Book of Enoch. Recently, after the death of Iran's leader, several interpretations began to emerge. Some people began to relate this event to ancient texts that describe the sudden fall of influential leaders, as if certain events were predicted long before they happened. What stands out is that the Book of Enoch talks about times when rulers would rise with great power, but would be overthrown unexpectedly, often when no one imagined that this could happen. But here an intriguing question arises. Do these texts really talk about specific events of our time? Or are we just trying to make sense of historical coincidences? To understand this, we need to go back thousands of years in the past and discover who Enoch was, a biblical character surrounded by mystery who, according to the scriptures, walked with God and disappeared from earth without experiencing death. And most impressively, the writings attributed to him contain visions about fallen angels, corruption among leaders, and the judgment of powers that would dominate the world. But what exactly did Enoch write? And why has his book been considered so controversial throughout history? In recent times, news caught the attention of governments, analysts, and the population around the world. The death of the leader of Iran. The event generated an immediate wave of international reactions, raising countless questions about what really happened and what the consequences would be for the global scenario. Iran is one of the most influential nations in the Middle East, involved in political tensions, regional disputes, and debates that directly impact the balance of power in the region. Therefore, when a leader of such importance dies suddenly, the impact goes far beyond the country's borders. Soon after the death was announced, different theories and interpretations emerged. Some analysts talked about possible political causes or unexpected circumstances. Others began to look at the event from a more symbolic or even spiritual perspective. It was in this context that some people began to mention ancient religious texts, including the Book of Enoch, suggesting that certain passages could describe the unexpected fall of powerful rulers. Although these interpretations generate debate, they also arouse an inevitable curiosity. Did ancient texts really talk about the fall of leaders and empires? To better understand why these comparisons began to emerge, we first need to know who Enoch was, one of the most mysterious figures mentioned in the Bible. To understand why so many people cite the Book of Enoch when talking about mysteries and prophecies, we first need to understand who Enoch was. Enoch appears briefly in the Bible in the book of Genesis, chapter 5. He was a descendant of Adam and belonged to the 7th generation of humanity. What makes his story so intriguing is that, unlike almost every other biblical character, his life ends in a completely unusual way. The Bible says something very curious about him. Enoch walked with God, and he was no longer found, for God took him to himself. This short phrase has raised many questions over the centuries. Unlike other biblical figures, the text does not describe Enoch's death. Instead, many interpret that he was taken directly by God without experiencing death. Because of this, Enoch came to be seen as someone who received special revelations about heaven, angels, and the destiny of humanity. Centuries later, texts attributed to him, known as the Book of Enoch, began to circulate. These writings describe stunning visions, including stories about fallen angels, divine judgments, and the future of Earth's kings and rulers. But there is a detail that makes everything even more intriguing. This book is not part of most Bibles used today. Then another important question arises. Why did a book so ancient and full of mysterious visions end up being left out of the traditional scriptures? Centuries after the time in which Enoch would have lived, ancient texts attributed to him began to circulate. These writings became known as the Book of Enoch, a collection of accounts describing visions about heaven, angels, judgments, and the destiny of humanity. What makes this book so intriguing is that it presents much more detailed stories about spiritual events than traditional biblical texts. It contains descriptions of angels who and they would have descended to earth, secrets revealed to men, and judgments reserved for leaders and peoples who would stray from justice. For many centuries, the Book of Enoch was known in different religious communities. Some scholars believe that parts of it were written between 300 BC and 100 AD, long after the time in which Enoch lived, but preserving ancient traditions. Despite its influence, the book ended up not being included in the canon of most Bibles. This happened for several reasons, such as doubts about its origin and the fact that some of its stories were considered difficult to confirm historically. Even so, the Book of Enoch never completely disappeared. Fragments of it were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in the 20th century, which showed that these texts had been circulating among ancient communities for thousands of years. And it is precisely because of these visions about angels, judgments, and the fall of powerful rulers that many people return to talking about the book whenever major world events happen. But there is a specific part of these writings that draws even more attention: the passages that talk about the fall of leaders and powers that would dominate the earth. One of the most striking parts of the Book of Enoch are the passages that talk about powerful leaders and the fate of those who govern unjustly. In the texts attributed to Enoch, visions appear where kings, rulers, and authorities on earth would be judged for their actions. In some of these passages, Enoch describes a time when powerful people would rise with great authority, dominating peoples and influencing the destiny of entire nations. However, according to these views, many of these leaders would end up facing an unexpected trial. The writings talk about rulers who accumulate power, wealth, and influence, but who end up being suddenly overthrown when the moment of judgment arrives. For some interpreters, these descriptions represent a warning about what happens when power is used unfairly or corruptly. Another interesting detail is that, in the visions described in the Book of Enoch, the fall of these leaders often occurs in a surprising way, when no one expects anything to happen. This has meant that throughout history, many people have tried to relate these texts to political events or the fall of important figures. However, interpreting these passages is not simple. Some scholars believe that they speak symbolically about the history of humanity and about cycles of power and judgment. Yet whenever a powerful ruler falls or dies unexpectedly, these ancient words come up for debate again. And that is exactly what happened after the recent event involving the Iranian leader. But after all, how did some people start to connect these ancient prophecies with current events? After the news of the death of Iran's leader, some people began to look at the event in a different way. Instead of seeing it as just a political or historical event, they began looking for possible connections to ancient texts and prophecies. On social media, in videos, and in discussions about biblical prophecies, some began to quote excerpts from the Book of Enoch that talk about the sudden fall of powerful rulers. For these people, certain events in our time could resemble the patterns described in these ancient writings. The idea that many raise is that, throughout history, leaders emerge with great influence over their nations and regions of the world. However, at times, these figures end up facing unexpected falls, something that, according to some interpretations, would have already been mentioned in prophetic texts. It is important to remember that these connections are interpretations made by people who study prophecies or analyze historical events from a spiritual perspective. There is no consensus among historians or scholars about these connections. Even so, interest grows whenever major global events happen. Many people start revisiting old texts, trying to understand if there is any pattern or message hidden there. But there is another curious point in the visions attributed to Enoch. He describes signs that would happen before the fall of great powers and rulers, and these signs raise even more questions. In the visions described in the Book of Enoch, there is an interesting pattern that appears before great judgments or the fall of leaders and powers on earth. According to some interpreters of these texts, Enoch describes periods in which the world would go through moments of great tension, conflicts, and corruption between rulers. In several passages, it is mentioned that before the fall of certain powers, there would be a time marked by instability between nations, disputes for influence, and leaders making decisions that affected millions of people. These moments would be signs that something bigger was about to happen. Another point that appears in the writings is the idea that human power can grow quickly, but can also disappear unexpectedly. Rulers who seem firm in their positions can suddenly lose everything, whether due to political changes, conflicts, or unforeseen events. For some people who study prophetic texts, these signs serve as a kind of warning about the cycles of history. Great powers emerge, dominate for a period, and at some point face their fall. When we look at the current world scenario, many see an environment full of geopolitical tensions, disputes between nations, and rapid changes in the balance of power. Therefore, some end up associating these ancient descriptions with events of our time. But there is another detail that draws even more attention in discussions about prophecies: the role of the nations of the East in many of these ancient texts. Throughout many ancient religious texts, the Middle East frequently appears as a central setting for important events in human history. This happens because several ancient civilizations, empires, and also many biblical events occurred precisely in this region of the world. In the scriptures and other ancient texts, different peoples of the East are mentioned in contexts of wars, alliances, conflicts between nations, and changes of power. Therefore, when something remarkable happens in this part of the world, many people start to observe these events with even more attention. Some prophecy scholars believe that the East has always played an important role in the unfolding of global history, not only politically but also symbolically within religious texts. Countries in the region, including those that are now part of the modern geopolitical scenario, are often involved in regional tensions, strategic disputes, and decisions that end up influencing the entire world. Because of this, when the fall or death of an important leader in this region occurs, many interpretations arise trying to relate these events with ancient texts that talk about changes in power between nations. Even so, a big question always arises in the midst of these discussions. Are we really seeing the fulfillment of ancient warnings? Or are we just trying to connect modern events with very ancient texts? This doubt leads us to an even deeper reflection. When landmark events happen in the world, it is common for many people to turn their attention to ancient texts in search of answers. Throughout history, wars, the fall of empires, and the deaths of powerful leaders have often been interpreted in light of prophecies or ancient writings. The Book of Enoch is no different. His views on trials, rulers, and changes in power arouse curiosity, especially when unexpected events appear on the world stage. Some believe these texts may contain symbolic warnings about how human power is temporary. According to this view, Enoch would not be describing specific events, but rather showing a pattern that repeats itself in history. Leaders rise, exert great influence, and, at some point, face their fall. Other scholars, however, argue that we should be careful when trying to directly link modern events with texts written thousands of years ago. For them, many of these passages are spiritual metaphors or reflections on justice and morality, rather than literal predictions of future events. Even with these differences in interpretation, one thing is certain: the Book of Enoch continues to arouse curiosity to this day, precisely because it raises profound questions about power, justice, and the destiny of nations. And this brings us to the last reflection of this mystery. In the end, the mystery continues. Ancient texts, such as the Book of Enoch, have spanned thousands of years, and still today arouse curiosity, debates, and different interpretations. Some see in these writings warnings about the power, justice, and destiny of rulers, while others believe that everything should be understood symbolically as reflections on human nature and the cycles of history. The truth is that over time, many leaders who seemed unshakable ended up facing unexpected downfalls. Empires emerged, dominated the world for a period, and then disappeared. This pattern repeats itself over and over in history. Therefore, when a landmark event occurs, on the world stage, many people look back to ancient texts trying to find some greater meaning. But the question that remains is intriguing. Do these ancient writings really talk about events of our time? Or do they just reveal a pattern that has always existed in human history? Maybe we never have a definitive answer. But one thing is certain. The more we explore these texts and the events of today's world, the more we realize that there are still many mysteries waiting to be understood. Have you ever stopped to wonder if a political event that shocked the world could have any connection to an ancient text written thousands of years ago? What if the death of a powerful Middle Eastern leader had reawakened a mystery that many believed had been forgotten? Today, we will explore a question that has been circulating among history scholars, those curious about prophecies, and people fascinated by ancient texts. Did Enoch reveal anything about the fall of powerful leaders? And is there any mystery behind the death of Iran's leader? In recent days, news has taken over international news and social media. The death of Iran's leader caught the attention of the entire world, not only because of the political impact, but also because of the countless theories and interpretations that began to emerge soon after the announcement of what had happened. Iran is one of the most influential nations in the Middle East, involved in strategic decisions, regional tensions, and debates that often influence the global balance of power. When something unexpected happens to a figure of such importance, it's natural for the entire world to stop and try to understand what really happened. But amid political analyses, geopolitical discussions, and theories about the circumstances of this death, a curious subject began to appear in different places on the internet. Some people began to cite an ancient text that spanned centuries, full of mystery, the Book of Enoch. Maybe you've already heard about this book. For many, it is considered one of the most mysterious texts in religious history. For others, it is an ancient document full of visions and reports that talk about angels, judgments, and the destiny of humanity. What makes this book even more intriguing is the fact that it mentions the fall of rulers, the judgment of leaders, and unexpected changes in the power of nations. And that's exactly why, whenever a landmark event happens on the world stage, some people look back to these ancient writings trying to find possible connections. After all, the Book of Enoch describes times when powerful leaders would rise, dominate great peoples, and then face sudden falls. Could these descriptions just be metaphors about the cycle of power in human history? Or do these texts really record warnings that span generations? The fact is that the mystery surrounding the Book of Enoch never completely disappeared. For centuries, it has been debated by scholars, cited in ancient texts, and even found among manuscripts preserved by ancient communities. This shows that, even though it is not present in most Bibles used today, its stories continued to arouse curiosity over time. And when important events emerge on the world stage, such as the death of an influential leader, many people again wonder whether these ancient texts could be describing patterns that repeat themselves in history. But before trying to understand any possible connection between these events and Enoch's writings, we need to go back much further and answer a fundamental question. Who was Enoch, and why did his story become one of the most mysterious in all of biblical tradition? Before we continue and delve even deeper into this mystery involving Enoch, ancient prophecies, and the events that are catching the world's attention, I want to make a quick invitation. If this type of content interests you, mysteries of history, ancient texts, biblical prophecies, and current events that make many people wonder if there is something bigger going on, then leave a like on this video. This really helps the channel to continue bringing content like this. And most importantly, I want to know your opinion. Do you believe that ancient texts, such as the Book of Enoch, can reveal patterns or warnings about leaders and events in history? Or do you think all of these are just interpretations that people make when important events happen in the world? Write here in the comments, because your opinion could open up a very interesting discussion. Often, it is precisely the different perspectives that help to better understand complex topics like this. And if you like content that explores biblical mysteries, ancient history, and current events linked to prophecies, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. This way you don't miss the next videos, because in the next content, we will explore other ancient texts and events that also raise many questions. Now, yes, let's continue, because to understand why the Book of Enoch arouses so much curiosity to this day, first we need to know the central figure of this whole story. After all, who was Enoch? The man who, according to the Bible, walked with God and disappeared from the earth in a completely mysterious way. To understand why the Book of Enoch continues to arouse so much curiosity today, we need to go back in time and look closely at the figure at the center of this entire mystery. The story of Enoch appears very briefly in the Bible, but at the same time it is one of the most intriguing in the entire Old Testament. In Genesis chapter 5, within the genealogy that links Adam to the following generations of humanity, the name Enoch appears. At first it seems like just another name among so many other descendants, but when the text talks about him, something completely different happens. The Bible says that Enoch walked with God. This expression is very strong and at the same time very mysterious. Unlike other characters who had detailed histories, battles, kingdoms, or great events recorded, Enoch is remembered mainly for this simple but powerful phrase. And then comes something that has intrigued scholars and readers for centuries. The text says that he disappeared because God took him for himself. In other words, the biblical narrative does not describe Enoch's death as it does with practically all other characters from that period. This small passage opened up space for many interpretations throughout history. Some believe that Enoch was taken directly into the presence of God. Others understand this story to symbolize someone who had an extremely deep spiritual relationship. But regardless of the interpretation, one thing is certain. The figure of Enoch came to be seen as someone who received special revelations about heaven, the spiritual world, and the destiny of humanity. It was precisely because of this reputation that, centuries later, ancient texts attributed to him began to appear. These writings became known as the Book of Enoch, and they contain reports that go far beyond what we find in the short biblical passage. The book describes impressive visions about the functioning of the universe, the behavior of angels, the corruption that would arise among men, and even judgments destined for rulers and people of earth. One of the parts that draws the most attention in these reports talks about a group of angels who descended to earth and taught forbidden knowledge to humanity. According to the text, this would have profoundly influenced the course of human history, bringing consequences that would affect entire generations. For many people who study these writings, this narrative attempts to explain how certain knowledge and behaviors emerged in ancient civilization. But what really makes the Book of Enoch stand out in modern discussions are the passages that talk about power, rulers, and judgments on those who dominate nations. At different moments in the text, there are descriptions of leaders who rise with great authority, accumulate influence and power, but who eventually face a sudden fall when the moment of judgment arrives. These descriptions do not mention specific names or modern countries, but they talk about patterns that can be observed throughout history. Leaders emerge, conquer territories, influence millions of people, and seem unshakable for a while. However, in many cases, these same leaders end up facing unexpected changes that completely alter the course of power. It is exactly this type of passage that makes many people return to discussing the Book of Enoch whenever a major political event takes place in the world. When a powerful ruler falls, when an empire declines, or when a leader dies unexpectedly, some people begin to ask whether these events reflect patterns described in ancient texts. In the recent case of the death of the leader of Iran, for example, many people began to research these writings again and discuss possible symbolic connections between current events and ancient visions recorded thousands of years ago. Even though there is no consensus among historians or religious scholars about these interpretations, the fact that these discussions continue to arise shows how the mystery surrounding the Book of Enoch remains alive. Another interesting part of these texts describes periods of great instability between nations. In some visions, Enoch talks about times when the world would go through conflicts, tensions between people, and disputes for power that would affect different regions of the earth. These moments would be followed by significant changes in leadership and the structure of human power. When we look at the current global scenario, marked by geopolitical tensions, strategic disputes, and rapid changes in the balance between nations, many people begin to notice how these ancient descriptions seem to resonate patterns that continue to occur throughout history. Of course, this does not necessarily mean that the texts are predicting specific events of our time, but the idea that certain cycles repeat themselves in the history of humanity means that these writings continue to be analyzed and debated. And perhaps this is exactly what makes the Book of Enoch so fascinating. It mixes spiritual elements, symbolic stories, and deep reflections on power, justice, and human behavior. Therefore, whenever important events appear on the world stage, these old words are remembered again. Now I want to know your opinion on this. Do you think ancient texts like the Book of Enoch can reveal patterns that repeat themselves in human history? Or do you believe that all of these are just interpretations made after the events have already occurred? Write here in the comments what you think. If you want, you can also comment on one of these phrases, "History repeats itself," or "Mystery of Enoch," because this will help us understand how many people here are also interested in this type of topic. And there is an important detail about these ancient views that we still need to explore, something that may explain why this book continues to be debated to this day. If you've made it this far, to the end of this video, it means that this type of mystery involving history, ancient prophecies, and current world events has really caught your attention. And the truth is that there are many other topics like this that we are still going to explore here. So take advantage now and subscribe to the channel, because in the next videos we will continue investigating other mysteries linked to ancient texts, biblical prophecies, and events that make many people wonder if there is something bigger happening behind the story. And since you stayed with me until the end, I want to know who really followed everything. Comment the sentence below. I reached the end of the mystery. This way, I will know who are the people who really like this type of deep content full of curiosities. If this video made you think, reflect, or discover something new, leave a like, because this really helps the channel to continue bringing content like this. And now I recommend that you watch the next video that is appearing on your screen, because it also reveals another ancient mystery that few people know about, and that could completely change the way many people see certain events of our time.